Ano ai me ki aloha ia o kou pakahi apau, ko o kou mau kupuna, ko o kou mau aina, pono I, a he mea keu ka hauoli, e kuma anei, ka nani, ka malua ngā ko o lau, mahalo I ko o kou hele ana mai, ngā 5 I ho makaukau, ki ia hui, mahalo I ko o kou hana hoi, aloha. It's just such an honor to be here with all of you and to hear about the work that you've been doing, the places you come from, and the work that's really carried on across many generations in many of those places. So mahalo. I'm going to talk today, this is a panel on traditional knowledge, and as we know, our traditional Hawaiian knowledge is embodied in practice. So I'm going to talk about a cultural practice of mahele, or the sharing of products of fish from subsistence harvest. And I'd like you to think as we go along about the possible implications of climate change for this practice and for my findings. I'll get to that at the very end, and you will probably have thought about a lot more things and aspects of that than I have. I grew up I was born just up the road in Kaneohe and was very fortunate to move to Kalihiwai, Kauai when I was 3 years old, and now to raise my children in Kalihiwai and in the area of Hale'ea on the north shore of Kauai, which is where my research takes place. So I study community-based management, specifically ahupua'a management of natural resources, which as we know in Hawaii, throughout Hawaii, once resided at the ahupua'a level and then moved to the state level. And particularly, I look at collaborations to bring caretaking and management of natural resources back to the local level in Hawaii. The particular opportunity I study is an opportunity in Haena, Kauai, to create their own rules for fishing and coastal use in the ahupua'a. And these are to be based on traditional practices for this area. And they will have the power of state law. And this has been a 5-year process, which I've tracked over the past 5 years, working with community members and government agencies to create draft rules, which now are pending approval by DLNR. And I just want to acknowledge the many other Hawaii communities who've been engaged in similar efforts and made this opportunity possible in Haena. So this is what I'm sharing today as part of a broader dissertation on this process that looks at a couple of different things. Today we're going to talk about the contemporary significance of subsistence fishing and of sharing, or mahele. But other parts of my thesis really look at what does it mean to take traditional values and practices for a specific place and put them into law, and also at what kind of lessons we can learn from Haena for collaborative government community resource management partnerships elsewhere. So just Haena has a long history of subsistence fishing and of cultural use of inshore marine resources that is ongoing and enduring. Haena has also experienced a lot of change. So you'll see on this slide, whereas the use of the inshore areas of Haena was once exclusively subsistence fishing, now over 900,000 visitors per year visit Haena. If you drive to the end of the road on the north shore of Kauai, you will end up there. And they recreate, they snorkel, they scuba dive, all sorts of activities there. And if you look at demographics, land tenure in Haena, we talked about private and public, has changed tremendously. So a lot of the people I talk to who are my own age have seen tremendous shrinking of the areas they could access in Haena with their own lifetimes as land has been sold off. And so the latest census data of 2010, if you look at the population of Hawaiians, 2010 is the first time Haena was broken out. So there's some these numbers may not be exact, but we are seeing a tremendous decline in the Native Hawaiian population residing in Haena very recently. So our questions in this study, the first is, what is the extent and significance of subsistence fishing and sharing, or mahele, in Hawaii today? And when you think about it, in Hawaii we track commercial fishing and recreational fishing, but we know very little about subsistence fishing practices. And by subsistence, I mean fishing to eat and to share for cultural practices and community practices and purposes. And this research began because fishermen in Haena and the Haena community members wanted to know where fish from Haena was going. They were really curious. So we decided we were going to focus on how are fish in Haena distributed and shared. What is actually caught, and how is it given? Where is it given? To whom is it given? And for what purposes? So to do this, over the past year and a half, I've worked with many Haena fishermen. It's a pretty small fishery. So when we ask community members over and over, how many people regularly fish in this area, got about 15 names. working in partnership with community members. We went house to house, visited with those people, talked with them on the beach, not while they were in the process of fishing, and handed out forms, and then continued to go and visit with them and help people to fill them out, talk story about what had been caught recently. And we had very regular participation by 10 of these individuals, including all of those who fish most regularly and who participate in the larger catches, which are the surround or hukilau catches. Most of these individuals are using throw net and surround net. And then we also interviewed everybody, as well as other community members who were frequent mahele recipients, the cooks of the community, and the people who prepare the fish for pa'ina. And then we gave community presentations, about 5, and asked people presented all our data and got feedback. What did this mean to people? What did they see happening? So here's what we found. Just first of all, we had 50 different catches resulting in 200 distributions. So this could be a 500-pound akule surround, which was maybe 20 different distributions, or it could be a throw net that went to 2 families. So they're very diverse. Also, we're just looking at first order distribution, when the lavaita gives catch to someone else. That could be a 500-gallon cooler, and we didn't track where that cooler then went. So we're underestimating here. The most common species caught were nenue by throw net and akule by surround. And just something that was interesting to me was how important both of these gears are. Throw net were used more frequently and year-round, whereas surround only happens in the summer. Surround net contributes a much larger number of gifts and mahele per surround, yet throw net, because it's used year-round, also is an important driver of distributions. We did assume that for every catch, there was a distribution to the fisherman's immediate household, which people said was generally, but not always, true. So we added that into the data here. So just to show you the importance of the summer months in Haena, that bottom picture shows you winter surf, and surround it. So on the left, much more of the catches, 65% are in the summer, but over 82% of the distributions come from summer fishing. Okay, so just a few, I'm going to go over 5 key findings here, all related to ahupua'a system and elements of the traditional ahupua'a system that remain resilient and are perpetuated through mahele, through the sharing of subsistence fishing products. So first of all, it's just cultural perpetuation. In ahupua'a, people had roles, and the role of fishermen was very important, and that continues to this day. People have a strong sense of kuleana to feed. 75% of the distributions of fish were mahele, were given away, for either 12% for pa'ina and communities events, and 63% just giving. Only 25% of the time were the fish eaten just in the fisherman's household. And people talked a lot about their kuleana. They remembered fishing with grandfathers and uncles and dropping off fish at every home on the way home. They want their children to do the same thing. They're teaching them to do the same thing. And the importance of that food, not just the akule, but the akule that swims around from Napali, and how that tastes, and how you eat it with your family, and how it's prepared. And so the importance of the cultural perpetuation that's created by this practice and fostered. Second was that, modern day ahupua'a, so there's Haena in yellow. And there's probably a time, 200 years ago, where most of the fish in Haena probably stayed in Haena. There was some trade between ahupua'a likely, but most of these species were found in other areas. Today, however, only 13% of the fish that was caught in Haena stayed in Haena. Most of it, 25% each, a total of 50%, goes to neighboring Wainiha and Kilauea. And that's because that's where the fishermen live now, and that's where a lot of the Hawaiian families have moved to. All of these other areas in sort of lighter that get less than 10%, almost all of them have families with ancestral ties to Haena, or long-time sort of residence ties, and people remember that. So the ahupua'a still exists, it's just not limited by geography. The point about community cohesion too, so about a quarter of the time it's eaten in the immediate household. Another quarter of the time was given to extended family members, another quarter to people who help with the surrounds. The surround nets require many, many hands. And then another quarter, a little less, to friends and community members. People continue to remember kupuna. 11% of the distributions were to kupuna. So expanding this community cohesion point, these fish are really a way of gluing together the community. Every time you drop off fish, you remember how this auntie is related to your family, how you reinforce that connection. They also recognize existing sort of friendships and ties. One fisherman told me, I always take fish to this auntie because she watched my child when he was a baby. He's 10 years old. But without her, my wife and I could not have worked. So he continues to remember and perpetuate and honor that connection. Also, this is collective harvest, brings people together, collective consumption. People come to parties, share in the eating of these fish. There are certain ahupua'a that only get these fish. No, few Hawaiian families live there anymore, like Anini, but a lot of distributions went there because there's a beach park where a lot of parties are held. Just one other thing, reciprocal exchange and shared abundance. The fishermen talk about giving fish, mahele fish, and then how things return to them, the mangoes that would come, palusami, all sorts of things that would show up at their doors. This is not a direct exchange, you give me this, I give you this at all, but it's a cultural practice that continues at the ahupua'a mauka makai trade, right? Shared abundance. Where is their abundance, and how can it go beyond just one household to benefit everybody? And that could be a skill too. This is a map, it's hard to see, but basically what we found is O'io goes further than Akule. Why? Well, community members said that's because the people who know how to make fish cake live on the other side of the island. So the O'io goes there and comes back as fish cake. So sharing and trade of skills as well as of goods. And just a lot of the Lavaita in my study talk about self-reliance. What it means to them to know they can go outside, one evening, catch food, feed their families. And a lot of them talked about the 2 hurricanes that have hit Kauai, when the shipping was cut off and when the stores closed down. And the importance of knowing that they weren't dependent on that. But what Mahele does is make that self-reliance collective. Instead of only the families who continue to have active fishermen having that sort of peace of mind and security, because of Mahele, that sort of security extends to an entire community. So just in conclusion, this traditional practice, I think, really builds resilience. Our ahupua'a have changed tremendously on Kauai in a very, very short time in terms of who lives there, but in terms of all of these functions of ahupua'a, creating community cohesion, local level self-reliance, Mahele allows them to continue. Our study shows that Mahele provide an important food source, but that there's many other benefits that you can't take away from the food itself. Cultural benefits that all go together. And just thinking about the idea of subsistence and what that means. I won't talk about those other things. Just finishing up with climate change, implications of climate change. Loss of harvest grounds, the level of detail about which people know their fishing areas and on which tide certain fish come to them and how that will change. Obvious changes in seasonality. People talk so much about the importance of limu and how that is already changing, how that changes everything. And just how much more important these subsistence fishing practices will become as other supplies of food get cut off. And how that changes the social and cultural benefits. One of my young interviewees, young fishermen, says, yeah, we always say take only what you need. And we always say if you don't waste the fish, then that's fine, as long as you don't waste. But is that going to change? Is that still going to be true? How we define how much is too much and what we need and what the ecosystem can handle. And just climate change is a new test of the resilience of our enduring and ingenious and very place-specific, brilliant and still much to be learned about ahupua'a system. And just mahalo to the many partners who funded this research and taken part in this research, and to the research assistants from both Ha'ema and Stanford University, and especially to the fishermen who took time to talk about fishing, which is a big thing in our community, to collect and share this data. And then the last slide is just many, many people who've participated in and supported this research. Mahalo.